The world map looks permanent, solid lines, clean edges, clear divisions between one country and another. From the moment we first see a map, we're taught to believe something simple, that borders are fixed, that they don't change, that once a line is drawn, it stays exactly where it is. But that belief is an illusion, because in reality, there are borders on Earth that don't stay still, not over centuries, not over decades, but every single year. Lines that shift, lines that move, lines that quietly change their position while most of the world never even notices. And if you've ever looked at a map and thought it was a perfect representation of reality, then this might completely change the way you see it. Because the truth is, some borders are alive, not in the way you might imagine, but in the way they behave, they react, they adjust, they drift, and sometimes they move. To understand how that's even possible, you have to stop thinking of borders as lines and start thinking of them as agreements, because that's what they really are: invisible understandings between nations, decisions made at specific points in time, often based on geography, rivers, mountains, natural landmarks, things that feel stable, things that feel like they won't change. But here's the problem. Nature doesn't follow agreements. Nature doesn't recognize borders, and nature doesn't stay still. Let's start with something simple: a river. At first glance, it seems like the perfect boundary. It's visible, it's clear, it separates one side from the other. So for centuries, countries have used rivers as borders. It makes sense, until the river moves. Because rivers don't flow in straight, predictable lines forever. They shift, they curve, they erode land, they carve new paths, and over time, they change direction, sometimes slowly, almost unnoticeably. Other times, suddenly, violently. And when that happens, the border that was based on that river changes too. Now imagine this. Two countries agree that a river is their boundary. Everything is clear, everything is defined. Then one year, after heavy rains or natural shifts, the river moves slightly, not by much, maybe just a few meters, but enough to matter. So now the question becomes, where is the border? Is it where the river used to be, or where it is now? And the answer isn't always simple, because different countries can interpret that differently. Some say the border should follow the current path of the river. Others say it should remain where it was originally defined. And that disagreement is where things start to get complicated, because now what was once a clear line becomes uncertain, and that uncertainty can grow. Let's take this further, because this isn't just theory. This is happening in real places. One of the most fascinating examples is along the border between India and Bangladesh. This region is crossed by massive river systems that are constantly shifting, flooding, changing course, rewriting the landscape year after year. Entire pieces of land, known as river islands or sandbars, appear and disappear depending on the season. One year, a piece of land might belong to one country. The next year, it might not even exist, or it might reappear slightly further away. And suddenly, ownership becomes unclear. People living in these areas can find themselves in a strange situation. One year, they're in one country. The next year, they're in another, without ever moving. Think about that. Your home doesn't change, but the country around you does. Your identity, your citizenship, your laws, all shifting because a river moved. Now step back and think about what that means. Because this isn't just about geography, it's about reality. The idea that something as fundamental as a border can change without warning, without announcement, without most people even noticing. And this isn't limited to rivers. There are other forces at play. For example, glaciers, massive bodies of ice that move slowly over time. In some parts of the world, borders are defined based on mountain ranges and glaciers. But glaciers aren't fixed. They melt, they retreat, they shift position. And when they do, the boundaries tied to them become uncertain. Because if a glacier that once marked a border disappears, where does the border go? Does it stay where the glacier used to be? Or does it move with the changing landscape? And again, there's no simple answer. Now let's consider another scenario: coastlines. At first, they seem stable, but over time, coastlines change. Erosion wears away land. Rising sea levels push water further inland. Storms reshape entire regions, and slowly, the shape of the land changes, which means the borders tied to those coastlines change too. In some cases, land is lost. In others, new land appears. And when that happens, countries can gain or lose territory without any conflict, without any agreement, just because the earth itself changed. Now here's where things get even more interesting, because sometimes borders don't just move naturally, they move quietly, without public attention, without headlines. Small adjustments made over time, corrections, reinterpretations, minor changes that add up, until one day, the border isn't exactly where it used to be, and most people never noticed, because maps don't update in real time. What you see on a map is a snapshot, a version of reality frozen at a specific moment. But the real world, it keeps moving, constantly, quietly, relentlessly, and that means the lines we rely on are not as permanent as they seem. Now think about the implications, because borders define everything: where laws apply, where governments have authority, where people belong. If those borders can move, then everything tied to them can shift too. Jurisdiction, identity, control, all dependent on lines that might not be as fixed as we assume. And that leads to a deeper question. If borders can move naturally, if they can shift without clear agreement, then how stable are they really? Because stability isn't just about where a line is drawn. It's about whether that line stays in place. And as we've seen, that's not always guaranteed. But this is only the beginning, because while nature plays a role in moving borders, it's not the only force. There's something else, something even more complex, something driven not by the earth, but by people, decisions, actions, intentions. Because in some parts of the world, borders don't just move because they have to, they move because someone wants them to. And that changes everything. The borders moved quietly, rivers shifted, land changed. Nature rewrote the map without asking permission. But what happens when borders don't move because of nature, but because people decide to move them? Because that's where things become far more complicated and far more dangerous. Because unlike rivers or glaciers, people have intentions. And when borders start moving because of human decisions, those movements are rarely random. They are calculated, strategic, deliberate, and sometimes invisible. Let's start with something simple. Imagine a line drawn between two countries, clear, agreed upon, recognized. Now imagine one side slowly begins to change what happens near that line. Not dramatically, not in a way that immediately grabs attention, but gradually. A road is built a little closer to the border, then a small structure appears, then another. Then people begin to settle. Not in large numbers, just enough to establish presence. And over time, that presence grows. At first, it doesn't seem significant because nothing official has changed. The border is still where it was, on paper. But in reality, something is shifting. Because control isn't just about where a line is drawn, it's about what happens on the ground. And if one side begins to increase its presence near, or even slightly beyond, that line, the balance begins to change. Now imagine that process continuing over months, over years, small steps, incremental changes, each one barely noticeable on its own. But together, they start to move the reality of the border, without ever formally moving the line itself. And that's one of the most important things to understand. Borders don't always move officially. Sometimes they move practically, through control, through presence, through influence. Because at the end of the day, a border is only as real as the control behind it. Now let's take this concept further. Because in some parts of the world, this isn't hypothetical. It's happening right now. In certain regions, there are borders that are not clearly defined on the ground, lines that exist on maps but are difficult to enforce in reality. Remote areas, harsh environments, places where maintaining constant presence is challenging. And in those areas, small changes can have a big impact. Because when visibility is low, movement becomes easier. And when movement becomes easier, so does influence. Now think about how this affects perception. Because from a distance, nothing appears different. Maps still show the same borders. Official statements still reflect the same agreements. But on the ground, the situation has changed. And that creates a disconnect between what is recognized and what is real. Now imagine two countries both claiming the same area, not through open conflict, but through presence. One side builds, the other responds. One side increases activity, the other pushes back. And slowly, the line between them becomes less defined. Not because it disappeared, but because it's being contested in real time. Now here's where things get even more complex. Because not all border movements are visible. Some are subtle, almost impossible to detect unless you're looking closely. For example, infrastructure, roads, outposts, small developments that extend influence into new areas. Each one by itself might seem insignificant, but together they create a pattern, a shift, a slow movement of control. And because it happens gradually, it rarely attracts immediate attention. Until one day, the situation is completely different from what it used to be. And people start asking, when did this change happen? But by then, the answer isn't clear, because it didn't happen all at once. It happened over time, quietly, piece by piece. Now let's step back again, because this idea challenges something fundamental, the belief that borders are fixed because they are agreed upon. But agreement doesn't guarantee permanence, because agreements can be tested, pushed, reinterpreted, and sometimes ignored, especially in areas where enforcement is difficult. Now consider another layer: technology, surveillance, modern tools that allow countries to monitor borders more closely than ever before. You might think this would make borders more stable, more fixed, but in some ways, it does the opposite. Because increased visibility doesn't just reveal stability, it reveals movement. It exposes changes that might have gone unnoticed before. And when those changes are detected, responses follow, which can lead to tension, escalation, and sometimes conflict. Because when one side perceives that the border is shifting, even slightly, it can trigger a reaction, and that reaction can escalate quickly. Now think about the psychological aspect, because borders aren't just physical, they're symbolic. They represent identity, control, sovereignty. So when a border appears to move, it's not just about land, it's about meaning. And that's why even small changes can have large consequences, because perception matters. And if one side believes the border is being altered, even subtly, it can lead to a response. Now here's where things become even more interesting, because sometimes borders move not through expansion, but through neglect. Areas where presence decreases, where control weakens, where attention shifts elsewhere. And in those spaces, the absence of control creates opportunity. Opportunity for others to step in, to establish presence, to reshape the reality of the border. And again, this doesn't happen overnight. It happens gradually, quietly, until one day, the balance has shifted. Now let's connect all of this, because what we're seeing is a pattern. Borders that move not just because of nature, but because of human behavior, decisions, strategies, actions taken over time. And these movements are often subtle, difficult to detect, but incredibly significant, because they change reality without always changing perception. And that creates a gap between what people believe and what is actually happening. Now think about how this fits into the bigger picture, because the world map we rely on is a simplified version of reality. It shows clear lines, defined borders, but it doesn't show movement, it doesn't show change. It doesn't show the ongoing processes that shape those lines, and that means there's always more happening beneath the surface. More than what we see, more than what we're told. Now here's the question that brings everything together. If borders can move naturally, and they can move through human actions, then how stable are they really? Because stability isn't just about agreement, it's about consistency. And consistency requires control, enforcement, presence. And when those things shift, even slightly, the border can shift with them. Now imagine a world where multiple borders are moving at once. Some slowly, some subtly, some more visibly. Each one influenced by different factors: nature, human decisions, changing conditions, and all of them contributing to a reality where the map is never truly static, where lines are not fixed, but dynamic, constantly evolving. And that leads to something even deeper. Because if borders are not as stable as we think, then what does that mean for everything built on them? Laws, jurisdiction, identity, control. All of it depends on where those lines are. And if those lines can move, then everything tied to them can shift too. And that's where the real complexity begins. Because now, we're not just talking about geography, we're talking about reality itself and how it changes, quietly, constantly, often without us even noticing. But this isn't the end of the story, because there's one more layer, one more dimension that takes this idea even further. Because sometimes, borders don't just move, they blur, they become unclear, uncertain. And when that happens, the line between one place and another doesn't just shift, it starts to disappear. At this point, something should feel different. The way you see a map, the way you think about borders, the way you understand the world itself. Because what started as a simple idea that borders can move has now become something much bigger, something deeper. Because borders don't just move, sometimes they stop being clear at all. They blur, they fade. They exist in one place on paper and somewhere else in reality. And when that happens, the idea of a border starts to change. Because we tend to think of borders as lines, sharp, defined, absolute. But in many parts of the world, they aren't lines at all. They're zones, spaces where one country ends and another doesn't quite begin. Areas where control overlaps, where authority is unclear, where identity becomes complicated. And in those spaces, the border isn't something you cross, it's something you experience. Now imagine standing in a place like that. No clear sign telling you where one country ends and another begins. No visible marker defining the boundary, just a gradual shift in language, in culture, in control, in rules. One moment, everything feels familiar. The next, it doesn't. And yet, there's no exact point where the change happened, because the border wasn't a line. It was a transition. And that changes everything. Because when borders become transitions instead of lines, they stop being absolute. They become fluid, flexible, dependent on context. And that creates a completely different kind of reality. A reality where location isn't always fixed, where belonging isn't always clear, where the idea of where you are can depend on who you ask. Now think about how that connects to everything we've seen so far. In Scene 1, borders moved because nature changed them. In Scene 2, borders shifted because people influenced them. But here, in Scene 3, borders don't just move, they lose their precision. They become uncertain. And that uncertainty is where things become truly complex. Because when a border is unclear, everything tied to it becomes unclear too. Which laws apply? Which authority is in control? Which system governs what happens? And sometimes there isn't a clear answer. Now imagine living in a place like that, a place where the border isn't fixed, where control can shift depending on the situation, where identity isn't just defined by location, but by perception. Because in these regions, reality isn't always consistent. It can change from one moment to the next, from one perspective to another. Now let's take this even further, because there are places in the world where borders don't just blur, they overlap, where multiple claims exist at the same time, where different countries see the same land in completely different ways. And in those places, there isn't one version of reality. There are several, each one supported by its own perspective, its own logic, its own system. And that creates something incredibly complex. Because now, the border isn't just unclear, it's contested. And when something is contested, it becomes dynamic. It shifts, it evolves, it changes depending on what happens next. Now think about what that means on a global scale. Because we often think of the world as stable, organized, divided into clear sections. But the truth is that stability is more fragile than it appears, because it depends on something very specific: agreement, shared understanding, mutual recognition. And when those things weaken, borders become less stable, less defined, more fluid. Now here's where things become even more interesting, because in some cases, borders don't just blur or overlap, they become irrelevant. Not officially, not on paper, but in practice, in daily life. Because for the people living in certain regions, the border isn't something they interact with constantly. It's not something that defines every decision, every movement, every action. Instead, it becomes background, something that exists but doesn't always matter. And that creates a different kind of perspective. A perspective where borders are not the most important thing, where daily life is shaped more by local conditions than by distant agreements. And that challenges something fundamental, the idea that borders define reality. Because in these places, reality is defined by experience, by what actually happens, not just by what is written or agreed upon. Now let's bring everything together, because what we've seen across these three scenes is a transformation. From fixed lines, to moving boundaries, to blurred and overlapping zones. And each step reveals something important, something that changes how we understand the world, because the map we rely on is not the full picture. It's a simplified version, a clean representation of something that is far more complex, far more dynamic, far more unpredictable. And that leads to one final realization. The world is not divided as neatly as we think. The lines we see are not as solid as they appear. And the idea that everything is clearly defined is not entirely true. Because beneath the surface, there is movement, there is change, there is uncertainty, and all of it is happening all the time. Now here's the part that most people don't consider. If borders can move, if they can shift, if they can blur, then what does that mean for the future? Because the forces that change borders are still active. Nature is still shifting landscapes. People are still influencing control. Systems are still evolving. And that means the map is still changing. Right now, at this very moment, somewhere in the world, a border is moving. Maybe just slightly, maybe in a way that no one will notice immediately. But over time, that change will matter. And years from now, it might become something obvious, something people look back on and say, that's when it started. But by then, the process will already be complete. Because these changes don't happen all at once. They happen gradually, quietly, over time, until the reality is different from what it used to be. And that's what makes this so fascinating, because it means the world is not static, it's not fixed, it's not permanent, it's evolving, constantly, in ways that are both visible and invisible. And once you start to see that, you can't unsee it. Every map becomes a snapshot. Every border becomes a possibility. Every line becomes something that could change. Now think about the next time you look at a world map. Those clean lines, those clear divisions. They'll still be there. They'll still look solid, still look permanent. But now, you'll know something else. You'll know that those lines are not the full story. That behind them, there is movement. There is change. There are forces shaping them in ways that aren't always visible. And maybe the most important realization of all is this. The world is not defined by where borders are. It's defined by how they change. Because change is constant. Movement is inevitable. And stability is often temporary. So the next time you see a map, ask yourself something different. Not, where are the borders? But, how long will they stay there? If this changed the way you see the world, there are even more hidden patterns and global mysteries most people never notice. So make sure you subscribe, because the next video might reveal something even more unexpected.